So Steve is going to introduce us to the changing Utah housing game, public lands, public policies, and public support. So without further ado, I invite my friend and the expert on housing for the state of Utah, Steve Waldrip.
Well, I'll give him 1 out of 2. We are friends. Not sure about the housing expert in Utah. I'm pretty sure that's just not true. But I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. This is an interesting time, and we're dealing with some things now in our housing structure that are unprecedented. And so before we get into the specifics of the plan, I just kind of want to take a second and just sort of back up and say, why are we here? Um, in the state of Utah right now, actually, let me back up. Who here works for government? Who's government? Okay, who is private? Who works in the real estate industry? Okay, just try to get a feel for who we've got here today. And thank you again for the opportunity. This is obviously this is important for the governor. Uh, this is top priority, and there's a few reasons for it. But right now, who thinks they could buy the home that they live in now if they had to go ahead and buy it and get a mortgage and put, you know, some money down and get your financing and start fresh in the home that they're in? One person. All right, good. Congratulations. You are the winner of the day. But this is very representative of the state right now, about 91%. And again, this is based on, kind of the standard rules of real estate, 30% of your income going to mortgage debt. Um, and only 9% of our state population could afford to buy the home that they're in right now. Now, if you say, okay, well, that's cute, but we're already in homes. We're a 68% home ownership state. So what about that other 32%? What about them? It's about the same ratio. About 8% of them, if you don't own a home right now, about 8% can afford to buy the median priced home in the state of Utah. If you say, well, geez, the median priced home is over $500,000, that's a really expensive home. That's not a starter home. So let's drop that down to say $400,000. You're still only looking at about 17, 18% being able to afford that. Go down to 350, you're at maybe 25, 27%. So we're looking at this structural change in our society where we've gone from a situation. I'm looking around at the room and I'm seeing most people here are not fresh out of college. We may have a couple of youngsters in here, but when I was up and coming, uh, I knew that if I went to school and I got a job, that I could save some money for a couple of years and then I could buy a house. That was the deal, right? That's the American dream. Like, you get this opportunity to enter into the free market system. You get this opportunity to build generational wealth and create a future for yourself and stability. And if you go around to college campuses right now, has anybody talked to any young people lately about the American dream? What's the reaction to the American dream right now? It's cynical, right? It's so cynical. And it spills over into everything. They're cynical about our government. There's cynicism about the future. Uh, and part of that's being fed by algorithms that they're trapped into. I know my own son and I have this conversation. I'm like, no wonder you're so pessimistic. Look at what you're reading every day. Like, you're getting this constant feed of negativity. But there's an underlying truth to it, and that is that the American dream is at risk. Um, that core belief that if you work hard, if you do all of the things, that you're going to be blessed with stability, opportunity, and the choice to create value in a community, to create equity for your future. And that is quite honestly at risk right now. if you're under the age of 30, 35 even. The median age of the first-time home buyer in the country last year was 38. That's crazy. That's gone up 10 years in 10 years. And so we're losing 10 years of not just wealth creation, although that's a critical piece to it. But even more critical than the wealth creation piece is the stability piece. And you can't say enough about stability and the impact that that has on lives. Again, I'm going to just ask you, who knows somebody that's a young person that is kind of in that, like I just graduated from college, maybe I'm in a relationship, maybe I'm thinking about things, and they're saying, I'm not going to get married for a little while. Or if they're married, we're not going to have kids for a while. We can have a dog. And man, I am convinced that dogs are the new, like, I kind of want to ban dogs for a little while from young married couples because they're like taking the place of children. And we had a young couple out on a boat with us this summer, and my goodness, they treated their dog like it was a baby. And I wanted to just like, I mean, like I got so tired. I'm like, I'm just gonna throw the dog in the water and then go and see if they like dive off the boat or if, like now I've got given Christy Gnome vibes here, but I didn't do it. That's maybe the key thing. I did not do it, but I had that inclination because I'm like, they're replacing children with a pet because they don't have the stability. They don't feel like they are ready for that step because they're in a rental. They're not sure when their next rental. They're doing gig jobs. That stability component of our society is what we're risking, and we're seeing the impacts of that already in our demographics. Anyone know where Utah now ranks in fertility rate and birth rate? 10. It's crazy. We used to be like, I mean, we used to be like a given number. We'd like fight for Idaho, right? It was Idaho and Utah like battling it out for the most kids. We're now below replacement rate in the state of Utah. Um, and we're clinging to the top 10. Um, when you look at our educational achievement of third graders, anyone know what our third grade proficiency is in reading as a state? I'll tell you, we are really good in nationwide. I think we're number one or number two, and we're at about 50%. And those are directly, and these aren't correlation events in my mind. There's always correlation causation discussion. These are causation events. When you don't have stability as a young child, when you have people moving, I know in Ogden School District, there are some schools there, and there are in other inner city areas and Title I areas in our state where they average 3 children per chair per year on average in a classroom. And so when you remove stability from the equation of a child in an educational situation, school's already hard enough, right? When you're a kid and you're 8 years old, and especially if you're in a lower socioeconomic status and you're already, you got working parents and it's a struggle and it's hard, and then you take and you remove all stability out of that, you're going to have educational failures. And we're seeing this across the country. Birth rate, same thing across the country, dropping dramatically. So we're seeing the impacts of this lack of stability and this lack of faith in the system. Having a child is an act of faith. I have 4 boys. My youngest is, in fact, tomorrow. Wait, today's Tuesday. Thursday morning, flies to Mexico City to go to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Missionary Training Center. He's going to serve a mission in Argentina. So we're on the other end. I didn't doubt when I was younger that we could handle a future for our kids, that we had the ability to have that stability and give them that stability. And now I see that in our young people when I talk to them. and it scares me. And so when we talk about housing, and what our goals are in housing, it's not just that we want to help people make money and have generational wealth, although that's a key component of what we have today in our country. We have massive amount of wealth that's been created by this post World War II boom, and we're riding this wave of equity. We're on the we're just man we're on the crest of the equity wave right now. Um, Anybody that's owned a home for more than 20 years is sitting on a gold mine in equity in their home. Um, but that's only part of the story. The bigger part of the story is the stability and the hope. And I see the birth rate as kind of this indicating this leading indicator of the um, lack of hope in our system and in our structure. So that's what we're attacking. That's what we're addressing. That's why we're doing what we're doing. That's why starter homes are critical to the conversation that we're having across the state, and which are tough, right? Because what do we have to do to get starter homes? They got to be smaller and more dense. Small things on small lots. We used to be really good at it. We used to do this all the time. Some of you probably heard me talk about grandma's cupboards. What did grandma's cupboards look like? They were not soft close European hidden hinges. I'll tell you that much. They were exposed hinges, and you could tell how many times those cupboards have been painted because you could just go to the edge of the hinge, the filigree hinge, and like look at how many different colors. And if you wanted to, you scrape away a little bit and see how many times those have been painted. And if the felt little backing thing on the corner of the door had been knocked off somehow, and you slam that sucker, you could hear it through the house. Um, we used to be okay with that. We used to build things that people can afford, and that was fine. And we're now in this mode where we feel like, okay, well, you can't just build grandma's cupboards anymore. We got to build again. We got to have soft close European hinges. And I've been in affordable housing, a couple I've toured lately, and they actually have soft close drawers and cabinets and stuff. I'm like, well, this is super nice. I'd move into this. And I only had soft close European hinges for like the last 5 years of my life. My wife was so happy. Um, but that's become an expectation. And so it's sort of this larger discussion of what do we need in our communities, and then what opportunities are we creating for our children and for our grandchildren, and what impact is that having on our society. And I'm going to try and be super upbeat today because I don't want to have this be like a downer, like everything's horrible. There are good things happening, and I believe that of any place in the country that can figure this out, it's Utah. We're small enough still that we know each other, but we're big enough to bring in some resources. And so that's the key: is this mesh of resources and connections and people working to solve a problem. And so this strategic plan that we've been working on for the last year and a half is an effort to address the issue and to start to put a framework around how we're going to solve this problem. And so as we do this today, this is open for public comment. We want comment from particularly people that are in the world of housing and housing related issues. We want feedback on this. We need feedback on this. This is the result of a lot of time and effort, but it's not perfect, and it's a work in progress. And we don't need another really expensive doorstop at the Capitol that doesn't get anything, that doesn't move the needle in any meaningful way. So this has to be a document that the legislature takes on, and that they feel like they have support in enacting some of the hard things that we're going to have to do in order to address this issue and this housing shortage. So with that, let's go to the next slide. We'll buzz through kind of some of the first of these. Am I doing this? Oh, I am doing this. never mind. I'm looking like, hey, help. Um, there we go. All right. So really, we wanted to be collaborative. We wanted to have an actionable plan, um, have a framework around the plan so that this can guide additional and future discussions, because this is not the end. And then for those of you that who works for cities right now? Who loves the moderate income housing plan right now? Like just works for a city, just is like, oh man, that thing is so awesome. I love reporting. Um, we're going to update that. And again, it did its job for the time it was in. Um, we had over 100 individuals and people representing different working groups. There were and a lot of people involved in this, and we have a steering committee, we have a technical committee, we have working groups, we have sub-working groups, we have a lot of people engaged in this process to create what we have. But again, this isn't the end. This is simply, okay, now we've got something we can present to the public, we got something we can present to the legislature. Now let's see what we actually can get done. We're at this phase in it. We started last year, a little over a year ago, and we're now in, oh, we need to update. We're now in public comment. So October, November. By the end of November, we hope to close public comment, incorporate that into the final plan, which will be delivered to the legislature in December. In that public comment, we're also asking legislators to comment. We're meeting with legislators on a regular basis, getting their feedback and input, and trying to incorporate that. Because frankly, none of this matters if the legislature doesn't own this document at the end of the day. We can put out this lovely plan, but if it doesn't become law at the legislative level, and then also with our cities and counties, it's a really nice, expensive doorstop. Um, so we went through two phases. One is establish goals, and phase two was create the metrics that we're going to measure. And I think that was one of the key things. How are we going to measure our success? So that's one of the things that we're putting it forward publicly, and we want to get feedback on that as well, because that's one of the keys is how are we measuring whether or not we're succeeding. So these are the priorities. The governor, the day I was hired, I found out about that 35,000 starter home thing. There was a poster, and I sat down, and the governor's about to introduce me, and I saw this poster and it says we're going to do 35,000 starter homes in the next 5 years. It's about 18 months ago, and I sat there and I'm like, huh, oh, they didn't tell me that. Um, and so I started doing the math, and it's 0.8 per hour for 5 straight years, and we're pushing to get to that point, but it's a very aggressive goal. But it's also the point in the market where we're having the hardest time creating things on their own. 150,000 new housing units by the end of 2028, and 40,000 homes in identified regional centers. And the good news is the regional center discussion, stationary plans and things like that are really, really taking off. The legislature created a requirement for, and again, this won't, not in Cache Valley, but the concept is the same, where around transit hubs, cities were required to plan, draw a circle half-mile radius around every transit hub in the state, and be it tracks, front runner, or bus rapid transit, and say, okay, we're going to plan for additional density around these transit hubs. And that has gone very well. Right now, I think we're at about 80,000 planned units in the last 2 years as a result of that effort to create station area plans. But regional centers are an extension of that, right? And those operate everywhere in the state, whether you have transit or not. But they're also tied to access. If you think about where your major roads intersect, that's a regional center opportunity. And that's where we want more of our density, because obviously traffic is one of the impacts of density, and we want to mitigate that by keeping that as close to good transportation access as possible. Um, so we identified these three goals: improve housing affordability, availability, and stability, um, foster community well-being and quality of life, and seek consensus and evidence-based policy and housing support solutions. So let me just talk about number 2 for a second. Who here remembers right before the 2002 Olympics, years 2000, 2001? Anybody remember that time? Who remembers there being a little bit of fear about growth? It was a little scary, right? I remember I was kind of new to the state here. I just moved back, and all of the discussions. Oh man, we're going to grow so fast. I live in Ogden Valley, and everybody's freaking out. Like, okay, there's a lot of speculation on land prices and what was going to happen and how we're going to grow. And so now we're 25 years after that. And here's my statement about our growth from that period to now. We've done really, really well. We have grown incredibly well as a state. And the reason we can say that is because people still want to come here. So we've actually done it. We've created a state where we had this trepidation about growth 25 years ago, and we've grown massive amounts since then, nearly double population. But we've done it in a way that has preserved our quality of life to such a degree that people are still clamoring to come here. And that's going to continue. So when we think about growth and we think about kind of the fear and the scariness around growth, just understand we've been doing this for 175 years and we've been doing it really, really well because people still want to come here. And every time there's a fire in LA or, some rioting in West Coast cities or problems in the Midwest, we get in migration in the state of Utah. People are coming here because they want what we have, which is really great communities, really great people, and opportunity. And so that's what we're trying to continue to provide as we go forward with this strategic plan. And I really am optimistic that we can continue to do that because we've been doing it for 175 years. In the last 25, especially in a really significant pressure cooker. One Olympics, now we got another Olympics coming. We have this. Anybody watched the Utah Open last weekend? The golf tournament down in St. George, down to Black Desert. It's like the most amazing visual. You've got like this green, beautiful green, lush grass, and you've got black lava rock, and then you've got the red rock of Snow Canyon right behind it, and clear blue skies. And you're just like, okay, this is awesome. We're just showing like millions of 50 to 70-year-olds with disposable income and an insane appetite for golf, why they need to buy a home in St. George. And it's happening. And so we're going to continue to have that. We're going to have World Cup events now in conjunction with this next Olympics where people are they're going to see Park City. They're going to see our canyons and our ski resorts, and they're going to say, yeah, I need to go there. That's the refuge. So we're going to continue to be a refuge from the storms that are hitting most of the rest of the country. And with that, we can do that because we've been doing it. But we have to be thoughtful. And that's why, speaking at a planning conference, this is where that happens. The only way we grow well is if we plan well. If we don't plan well, then we won't grow well. And that's been one of the hallmarks, I think, of what we've done really, really well as a state is have really good, thoughtful planning. And there's a lot of push and shove in at the municipal level and local level around that. In some instances, I think we've crossed over too far on quote unquote local control, because we've gone from local control now to really hyper local control in a lot of instances, where a very small dedicated group of citizens can drive and direct all of the activity of a city or a county. And that's not healthy. So we've got to find that balance, and that's part of the challenge, is continuing to work to find the right balance so that we can meet goal number 2 as we do 1 and 3. Um, you know, the Utah way, we talk about that a lot. There's reality to it, though, and a lot of you are part of that. It is really a method of creating dialogue with respect, and coming to having hard discussions about competing priorities, but doing it in a respectful way, in a way that that allows us to produce the best results. And we've been doing it again. We've been doing this really well for 175 years. We're not newbies at this. We're really good at it, and we need to continue that. And so that collaborative approach, that consensus-based approach, is how we approach this housing plan. We had at the beginning over 300 tactics. We had several interns spending their full time going through and combing through everything they could read about everywhere in the country of what other people were doing. And so we created this big master list, and we whittled it down, whittled it down. Now we're down to the top 46 tactics. We've identified 15 as the highest priority, kind of tier 1 tactics. And then there's another 31 that are tier 2, but tier 2 could become tier 1. Tier 1 could become tier 2 through this public process and through the legislative review. Because again, this plan doesn't mean anything if the legislature doesn't take it up and say, yeah, this is now our document as well. So we've tried to be really collaborative with the legislature in creating this. So I'm just going to run through these, and now as I'm going through these, I'm going to run through them really quick, and we're going to have some time here. We've got time. We're going to have some Q&A. So let me run through these tactics, but feel free to sort of take mental notes, and we can come back and talk about these as soon as I run through kind of these top ones, and we'll just open it up to have a discussion, because this is where I get, you guys help me understand sort of what the feeling is around some of these tactics and how we're going to do these. So tactic 1 is really around what I think is one of the lowest hanging fruits that we have left in our state right now. We have, and I'm going to use a technical term. You're planners, though, so you understand technical terms, a lot of you. We have a crap load of public land. That's a technical term. I'm not sure the actual number that corresponds to, but it's a lot. We have a lot of public land, and this is not federal land. This is land that our state agencies, our cities, our counties, our school districts, our mosquito abatement districts in some instances, DNR. We own a lot of land that is not being used optimally. And it's not recreation land. It's not parks. It's just dirt. We've gone through a process with UDOT over the last year, where the legislature last year created a tool for UDOT to contribute their surplus land to affordable or attainable housing initiatives. And that's anything from 0% AMI up to about 120% AMI. And we've identified, I think, 300 and some odd acres in Salt Lake County alone that UDOT owns. And they're dog pieces of land. They're at the end of a road. Here's a triangle. We just met with somebody who said, what do you have in what's in St. George area down there? So we started looking, and there's some streets in the end of a freeway, and there's a 3/4 acre parcel that's at the end of a subdivision that's just dirt. And there are others that are 10 acres and 15 acres that UDOT owns that are left over from their construction projects. And we've done some preliminary looking, and we've got Laura Hanson with our state planning coordinator and director, looking at creating, and I'm crossing my fingers we get this by the end of the year, a public facing map that anybody in the state can click on and shows all of the public land in the state of Utah. So anybody can look at that and say, oh, wow, I didn't realize that was owned by Department of Natural Resources. What are they doing with that? Well, gee, I went by there the other day and it looks like it hasn't been touched in 40 years because most of these haven't. We drive by these places every single day. I bet you drove by 10 or 15 on your way here this morning. I probably, coming from Eden, drove by 30 or 40. And they're pieces of land that are not being used for any meaningful public purpose. So they're not contributing to the tax base, and they're not doing any good for the public, and they're not being used as, the sand lot. There's no kids playing baseball on them right now, so we're not taking away that opportunity for another movie. But they're just pieces of dirt. Now you throw in the federal land, now you're talking an entirely additional discussion where you have, particularly in southern Utah and in some of our more rural areas, where you have cities that have grown around parcels of federal land that are, again, just sitting there as dirt lots, and not providing any value, not creating anything for the public. So we want to identify those parcels and put them to productive use. Infrastructure. We have in the state of Utah, and Justin, I see there, the old number was 191,000 permitted, somewhere in that neighborhood, plus or minus 200,000 lots that are approved, ready to be built, but aren't being built. And the primary reason they're not being built is because they don't have infrastructure. And when we say infrastructure, this doesn't mean just like, sewer or roads and sidewalks within the development. We're talking about significant regional infrastructure, water, sewer, power, transportation, those things that make these opportunities happen. And we have a really, really good structure and system around providing road infrastructure in the state of Utah. We get together in various groups and we make sure that we don't have a highway that goes to this city boundary and then stops. And then the next city says, well, we don't want that road there. We want it over here. So then the road stops here and then we pick it up over here and we continue that road. We don't do that because we're not stupid. And so we have groups that get together and say, okay, argue amongst yourselves, basically, and figure out where that road needs to go. And so we figure it out and we get together and everybody, and then we have a road that goes through multiple communities and is servicing those communities in the best way possible, according to the decision-making structure of that body. We don't have the same structure for other infrastructure in every instance. For water, for sewer, for regionally significant infrastructure. So funding regionally significant infrastructure, meaning I know of a location I'll give you two examples. One is Southwest Salt Lake County. There are 8,000 permitted lots, I think, that are waiting on water infrastructure. I think they need 2 or 3 water tanks, some associated infrastructure to bring that water through. You've got 20 developers, 3 cities, a county. Nobody has the capacity to take on that project and deliver that in a reasonable way. And so that's something where I think the state can step up and say, hey, we can provide the cash for this infrastructure and provide the opportunity, and then have that infrastructure be delivered and create those opportunities within the places where we already have lots permitted. Everybody's already agreed, yeah, we want housing here. Now we need to just get it there. So infrastructure becomes a key component. So creating a fund where we can deliver that infrastructure where it's needed, I think is critical. It's again one of kind of the low-hanging fruits of addressing our housing shortage. Acquisition and development of affordable housing. So make sure we have the right vocabulary. We talk about affordable housing, and affordable housing is generally low income housing. So it's, people that are making no money up to about 50 to 60% of the area median income. And then we have attainable housing, which is people that are making 60% to 120, in some cases 140, 150% of the area median income. And so two very different discussions. Affordable housing has always required government subsidies, always, because the market doesn't work for that segment. You can't build something and lease it for less than it costs to build and expect someone to do that on any kind of a regular basis. You have to provide subsidies. And that's been the business of government for a very long time. We've provided subsidies for low-income housing for a very, very long time. It's the only way it gets built. And it's part of our ethos, right? It's part of our culture is we care for the least of those among us. That's part of who we are. And we've been doing that for a very long time. The challenge we have now is that we're not only having to worry about subsidizing low income, we're also worrying about subsidizing workforce housing, attainable housing for people that are making a market rate wage in a community. Again, going back to that, only 8 or 9% of Utahns that are making area median income wage can afford a home. And so we're in new space in the state. We're having to jump into sort of this workforce market rate housing arena that we've never had to be a part of. So for the affordable piece, we know we have to continue to do that, and it requires subsidy. And so making sure we're optimizing those subsidies as we go forward, making sure we're coordinating resources is critical. And developing new resources to the extent we can. One thing I want to make really clear is that we cannot tax our way out of this housing issue. You and I don't make enough money to pay enough taxes to spend our way as a government out of our housing crisis. This is a billions and billions of dollars issue in Utah, trillions if you look at the overall country. We can't tax and spend our way out of it. Private markets have to do the work of getting us out of this shortage. And the job of government, as we see it, is to make sure that they can do their job effectively, and that any public subsidy that we contribute to the problem is protected long term. That we're not just giving money away and creating a winner and a loser, and our tax money is going and somebody, in 5 years is sitting there holding the winning lottery ticket and saying, hey, I won, I get this subsidy, no one else can have it anytime in the future. And so that's one of the challenges when we're talking about public land and public subsidy and subsidizing our housing stock. Number 4, one of the things that we've discovered over the last couple of years is that our housing structure is incredibly fragmented, again, because it hasn't needed to be coordinated. We've got Department of Workforce Services, we have the Governor's Office of Economic Development, we have our AOGs, we have other independent entities, about 10 different independent state entities that are all working on housing. We have Utah Housing Corp. We have all of these entities that are out doing their own thing in the housing space. And so there's a lot of sense in consolidating and coordinating those resources. And so there will be a committee bill, the Department of Economic Development and Workforce Services committee has opened up a committee bill file to consolidate and coordinate all of those state resources into one location, so that from an executive branch standpoint, the legislature can go to a person and say, okay, what executive branches you execute these programs that we're putting in place? There's a person who is responsible for housing in the state of Utah and for all of the housing efforts that the state is undertaking. And so consolidation and coordination is really key as we go forward. And so we're working on that. There'll There will be a couple of apple carts that get upset in that. Lori and I sit on the board of one of those apple carts and Utah Housing Corp. Utah Housing Corp has operated as an independent state agency for 50 years. They just had their 50-year anniversary. Um, but we need to bring them into the mix and help them be a part of the state solution instead of just being this thing that does their thing outside here. And then we have other things that are doing their thing over here. We have to coordinate our state and federal resources in a much more intelligent way. And so that's the effort around number 4 there. Number 5, for those of you that work in local governments, who feels like you get unfunded mandates every once in a while? Anyone? Do we ever do those? Does the legislature ever just say, hey, do this, and we don't know how you're going to pay for it, and frankly, we don't care. Just, go do it, and we're going to hit you with a stick if you don't. We're pretty good at that. One of the things that we've done really well at with the station area plans that we were talking about earlier is we created a funding mechanism for local governments to draw on the technical resources to create those plans. And as we look at our high growth areas, a lot of those are smaller cities. I think about Colville. You guys know where Colville is? It's kind of a long way from here, but we'll use that one. I won't use any local communities up here, so I don't get anybody throwing rocks at me up here. Orange juice. But Colville had a application for an annexation. Developer owned several hundred acres adjacent to Colville. They've been working with Colville for the last couple of years on a master plan and trying to figure out, okay, how do we create this needed resource on the Wasatch Back? They were going to do some workforce housing, some mixed use, really, again, in my opinion, a really nice development. But Colville is sitting there going, okay, so we've got a city administrator and we have a brand new planner that's been out of school for like a year and a half. And you're asking us to take on this several hundred acre master plan development and feel like we can manage that process. And their reaction to it, their city council's reaction is, this is way too much for us. We're out. So they just declined to annex it. And the developer's going, okay, so I've got this land that I can't do anything with. And we need housing, but I can't provide housing because I can't get any entitlements because I can't get the city to work with me. So there's a structural problem there. And we've seen it in this valley in some instances and over the hill in Box Elder, where there's so much fear around growth and so much fear in the community about, you're going to change my way of life. And so I'm going to go to my elected officials and say, do not change my way of life. And we've had a couple of elected officials that I've actually written stuff down. I can't believe they put this in writing. So I was elected to make sure nothing changes in my city. And it wasn't anybody up here. So just so you know that. But honestly, that is the most asinine statement I think I've ever seen from a local elected official in my life. You're going to be the first one to have no change whatsoever. You're going to freeze time, which we all wish we could do, right? We all wish we could freeze time. And it was the 1950s again. And Ward and June Cleaver were sitting there and the beaver was coming home and, and she's wearing pearls and heels and, he gets his pipe and sits in a chair. And what an idyllic time. Of course, if you went back to the 1950s, they would say, oh, the 1920s were the greatest time ever. And you go back to the 1920s, oh man, the 1870s. Now that was when we had it right. Go back to the 1870s, oh boy, right before the Civil War, we had it the best. Go back then, well, right before the Revolutionary War, right after the Revolution, that was when we got it figured out. We're always a victim of our own bias against the time that we live in and I idealize earlier times. But again, we've done a really, really good job as a state of growing, and we're going to continue to do that. And so freezing time is not an option, although some are trying. And what happens when you do that, you know what this looks like, right? You have all this pressure building up against a dam and you're holding up the wall of the dam and you're plugging the holes in the dike and all of a sudden the dam bursts and then the floods hit. And there's no channeled growth. It's all just chaotic growth. And so how much better and wiser is it to plan for the growth that's coming, to create the appropriate channels, to create the appropriate planning around that growth and do it right? And so that's what we're encouraging in our local communities. But again, there's a lot of political pressure for things not to change. And so providing these resources and technical assistance to the communities that are facing high growth, I think is critical. Because otherwise they don't have the ability to plan. I can't go to Colville and say, hey, what's your plan for the next 20 years? Like, geez, we're just trying to stay afloat here. And we have a lot of cities that are just trying to stay afloat. We've created some resources as state, and what we found is even when we sent some technical assistance to rural communities, most of that assistance has gone to just like writing checks and keeping the lights on and not to planning. And so we have to be much more thoughtful about how we provide that planning assistance and how we encourage good growth planning to happen, because it's coming and we either do it well or we do it poorly. Number 6, zoning reforms by existing state funding programs and priorities to cities that are implementing the state priority of housing starter homes and those kind of things. That's something that Representative Roberts is working on a bill to incentivize cities that are, quote, making the effort, and they're working with their communities and providing for appropriate growth, and maybe having the opportunity for them to get some additional state resources out of that. Number 7, shared equity models. There's community land trust models. There's limited equity cooperatives. There's other things that are out there that as we go back to number 1, we look at state lands. Here's one of the challenges when we look at our publicly owned lands. So let's say we contribute some land to a project. Developer gets it. They sell the land, or they sell homes. They build homes on the land. They sell the homes. How do we make sure that that public investment of land is not then gobbled up either by the developer or by that one-time winner of the lottery that holds that property at year 5, 7, 10, whenever that time clock ticks off. And then we've got to go recreate that opportunity again with a limited resource, our most limited resource, which is land. And so looking at opportunities to engage different models, there's a lot of them around the country. We're looking at which models we incorporate into our structure. Detached ADUs are going to be a discussion going forward. We have internal ADUs. I think it's a good tool to have. I think it's important for people to be able to build detached ADU if they want to rent out a little piece of their property and have some additional income. It becomes one of the solutions to the pricing crunch that people are facing. Number 9 is wonky. So we have some state tax credits that go to our affordable housing, and we have to reauthorize those state tax credits. If we don't, we will not be doing probably very much affordable housing at all going forward, because the federal tax credits just aren't enough. And again, Lori, we know about this. We have to reauthorize those state tax credits because they are critical to providing our affordable level housing in the state. And then number 10 goes back to the consolidation, creating a single point of contact for coordination of federal, state, and other funds to implement solutions. It was interesting. We got some numbering work to do on this. Now we're staying on number 6. So deed restrictions on number 10, that's what we were just talking about, a mechanism to maintain the public investment in any housing that we do utilizing public funds. Number 6, Medicaid funding. This is, again, kind of a wonky one, but if you're in the permanent supportive housing space and you're providing housing for people who are going to need housing for a very long time, we have to do a better job of coordinating our state and federal resources to provide the services for those people who are going to be in subsidized housing for the rest of their life. Water supply. Anybody worried about water? Heard anything? Anybody hear about, like, we got this lake struggling? Making sure we have enough water for growth is really critical. and figuring out how we're going to do that. We have a patchwork of water um, laws throughout the state. In some places, when you build a home, you have to have X amount of water. In some places, you have to have 2X for the same size home. And in some cases, if you're doing a one bedroom condo, you have to have the same amount of water as a 7,000 square foot, 10 bedroom, 9 bath estate. We need to have a lot more common sense around our water resources, understanding what we have and how we're going to use it. Um, Short-term rentals, that is an issue in some of your communities up here in Cache Valley, where short-term rentals have had a huge impact on local real estate markets. We've got to get better at appropriately managing those from a public standpoint, making sure they're paying their fair share of taxes. We shouldn't be subsidizing short-term rentals with primary residence exemptions for property tax. That makes no sense at all. So we can do better at that. And public conversation. It's kind of what we're doing today. We have to have conversations around reasonable growth. And the answer can't be, well, we're just not going to grow. We have to do better than that. And accept the fact that growth is coming. We're not going to be the first state or community in the history of mankind to stop growth. That's probably not our lot in life. Our lot in life is to figure out how to do it well. I'm going to show you this. This is currently live on the governor's website. And this is the beginning of our metrics and how we're measuring our success, how we're measuring what we have and what we're doing. So if you go to governor.utah.gov, I think is the website. I don't know if it's up here. It's the governor's website. You click on the drop-down menu. There's a housing link, and you can bring up this live map that you can click through and do a lot of interactive tracking of how we're doing. And that's something I think that's also critical as we engage the public and the legislature to make sure we're tracking and publicizing our tracking and making sure everybody understands what we're doing. We've talked about the Utah way. We know what it is. We know how it feels. You know how it feels when you do things the right way, and you know how it feels when you do things the wrong way. And we have to do things the right way if we're going to be able to grow intelligently. That's my contact info. Oh, there it is. Yep. governor.utah.gov/housing. That's what I wanted to get to. So we have a few minutes now. I don't know if there's a microphone or if we just want to shout out questions. I'm happy to go back slides if you have any questions. Yes, please. Okay. So. Uh-oh, that sounded ominous. Okay. Where do I begin?
Okay. What do you think would happen if we allow mixed use on all our commercial lands? All vacant commercial lands could become mixed use, and all places that are already commercial, let no apartments on top of what's existing.
I actually love that idea. There's concerns around that about infrastructure capacity. And so there can be some reasonable guardrails, I think, you put around that. But if you think about the amount of land we dedicate to parking lots, and then the capacity we have in some of these commercial corridors, same issue if you think about legacy neighborhoods, our older neighborhoods, where we used to have density, and I don't know the statistics for Cache Valley, but I know like in Sandy, we used to have an average density of close to 5 people per household, and our infrastructure was sized that way. And density is now a little less than 3 people per household. So if you just think about the number of toilet flushes and showers and things like that, our infrastructure in many instances is underutilized. And so we can add, again, appropriate density in some of these spaces without overwhelming infrastructure, which goes to mixed use in commercial zones. It goes to missing middle housing and detached and attached ADUs in our existing residential areas. I think there's a great opportunity there that we're not we're not hitting. And I think that's one of the tactics that we're looking at. And there's some controversy around it. Some other states have done that. New Hampshire, I think, most recently passed a law that allowed for mixed use in any commercial zone. And it kind of, but I think there's ways we can do it with appropriate guardrails to make sure we're not overwhelming our infrastructure and doing right. And go to LA, they're building apartments on top of a Costco. Hey, what an amazing thing if you love hot dogs and pizza. You would gain like 1 billion pounds. I would personally. I'd be like, oh, $9 pizza every single day. I would probably have three. But that's really wise planning, I think. And I think we can do a much better job of intermixing our uses. Thank you for questions. Yes.
Since you mentioned LA, possibility to plan correctly that we don't price locals out. A lot of people would think, where do you talk LA? Like,
That is the challenge. And I think that's the opportunity of our public land. And one of the things that we've seen cities do successfully and planning commissions do successfully is, and again, the priority for the administration for us is ownership opportunities. And so if we're going to create ownership opportunities with public land and have it be a subsidized, deal where we're, our goal is to be at maybe 75% of market for some of these subsidized opportunities, and then offer them first to people who already live and work in our communities. We can do that legally, and that's one of the structures that we're pursuing and trying to encourage cities to pursue is when they're dealing with their public and they're saying, hey, we're going to create condos here. Everyone's, freaking out. That's too much density. But if you can target in those condos teachers, police officers, nurses, firefighters, and get them into your communities, those are the people you want there. I don't think it's legal. Looked at it a little bit. Anybody give me some ideas on this to say Utah natives only? That may be a little bit too much of a stretch for some of our restrictions, but we can provide the opportunities to those who already live and work here, and I think that's the key. But yeah, that's a huge concern because if we are worried about our culture, and that's our main concern is, hey, we're going to lose. This is what you hear when you go to community. Oh, we're going to lose our way of life. You're going to ruin. A, you're taking my view, and B, you're ruining everything I've built my whole life around. The fastest way to do that is to export our kids and import their replacements. Yes, back in the back, and then we'll go here and there. No. All right, moving. No, please go ahead. You may. Yeah, we need ideas, right? Here's a couple because part of the challenge when you get into deed restrictions and community land trusts, if you go to Park City or to Moab where they have really successful land trusts, they cap appreciation at a fixed amount. And that feels wrong to me, frankly, because if you're capping someone's appreciation at 2 or 3%, you're essentially saying to them, hey, we're going to give you this benefit, but we're going to keep you poor. We're going to make sure you don't ever get the full benefit of market appreciation. So one of the ideas, and again, I'd love to discuss more, is let's say we create through our structure, we have some land and we contributed, and there's a project that comes in at 75% of market value. And so the market is 400, and we're selling this thing at 3. The participant who buys that at 300,000 should have, in my mind, the ability to grow at the same rate as the market and just be like all of everybody else that just participates in the market. So when they go to sell, they then sell at 75% of the then market. And so they're just tracking the market. The unit will always stay less expensive relative to market. It'll always be at 75% of market. It won't get more affordable, which is the goal of some of the land trusts, where they're capping appreciation or swapping appreciation. But to me, that's the simplest way to give people the benefit of their bargain, which is I bought $300,000 of this thing. I should be able to grow at that rate and not have some artificial cap come in. But I'd love to hear other ideas, because this is one of the challenging things that we're looking at going forward is how do you maintain that long term? And then, who's managing that deed restriction? We can't put that on local government. Although I know you wish so badly you could own that as well as an unfunded mandate. But I think we need to handle that at the state level. Lori.
Where are you gonna get the numbers? Saying that, like, whatever it's going to get, somebody's gonna come California, maybe not. Number two, where is there any way of taking some of these tax credits? But I had some senators and some things for that tax credit, and somehow through the legislature manipulated where these tax credits would go to some of these developments, and not only put in the infrastructure, but maybe incentivize the builders build. And number three, is there a way to incentivize the owner for land, when you do a development or into the landowner and say, hey, I'm going to sell your house here at the 50% of what it's worth. And then, you take advantage of them. They have the same right to sell the land with the value that is there. Is there a way to make that more affordable?
3 really good questions. I'll try and tackle them all. So the first one is, where do the builders come from? And this is kind of one of the points I made is we cannot solve this with subsidies. We don't have enough tax money to solve this. The market has to produce these results. We have to make it so that the market can produce these results. And that includes the building community. They have to be able to come in and make a reasonable enough profit that they're willing to come back and do it again. If you take advantage of somebody, you get to do that one time, generally speaking, and then they'll never come back. So it has to be market responsive. It has to be market responsible. We're having a really hard time keeping our local builders engaged in building because the market is so tough. And I think that's one of the areas that we need to really focus on is our small local builders. Historically, they've made up about 60 to 70% of our market. And they're the ones that get hit the hardest and have the hardest time getting financing right now. On the land piece, again, I just don't see that there's a way we can subsidize the acquisition of large tracts of land without a huge public input of cash. And I think we can do that in a limited fashion, maybe on affordable or attainable housing. But market wide, we're not going to be able to do that. And that's where the public land piece, I think, becomes a critical component to what we're looking at going forward, because we own it. We can value it at whatever we want. As public, we can contribute that as a public benefit into a project that produces a public benefit. But again, it comes back to like the deed restrictions and how do you manage and preserve that public benefit long term.
Create a plan, each house gets built. over time, it lost, gets planned back or whatever, but have some kind of subordination in there that participates maybe at a higher rate as things get.
Yeah, that's a great thought. I'd love to talk with you more about that. I'm glad for that. Okay, it is at time. I'm gonna be here for a little bit. I'm gonna listen. Oh, we have one final question. Okay, please.
Place like East Valley, place like Oscar Ranch, where it was built, they failed pumping test several times, and the valley was also under extreme agricultural pressure for the water. Not even this.
Very carefully. It's one of the great questions. And part of the challenge, I think, is we aren't even arguing over the same facts. I can go in the valley where I live. I can find 3 different studies that will tell me 3 different things. And so we're arguing over which facts. We're not arguing over solutions. We're arguing over what is. And so I think part of the structural challenge that we need to address on water is creating a clearinghouse at the state level where people can say, hey, this is reasonable, um, uh, 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 reliable data set for what water we actually have so that we can then make decisions based on good data instead of based on which study I like and who paid for which study. To me, that's sort of the threshold question that we're dealing with in the valley. And I know like in Tooele Valley, same thing, where people are arguing over the facts. And if you're arguing over the facts, you're never going to get to a solution because you're just going to say, well, I don't believe we have any water. Well, I believe we do. And so that's part of the challenge is getting the state engineer, frankly, to step up and say, we're going to certify and create confidence around a set of facts that we can then create policies around. Because if we're just arguing around facts, we're never going to get anywhere. A great question, because water is there's a lot of work to do around water consumption and water structure in our state. Okay, thank you so much. For those that are in local government, my hat is off to you. I feel your pain. I've been on a planning commission, and I've seen the work that officials in local government do. I work with them every day. I understand the challenges you guys face. For those in other industries, I don't care about you at all. No, we really appreciate everybody. We need to come together around this. Hopefully, the spirit of what I've said about the need for creating our future and how real estate and stability impacts the future of our society will hit home, because I think that's the critical message that I'm taking around the state from the governor. Thank you.